Hello, this is Mark Wildman of Wildman Athletica here with
Kaevon, founder and CEO of Bells of Steel.
Today we're going to kind of talk about where the fitness industry is at currently. Kaevon, tell me about what you see as where the fitness industry is right now and maybe a little idea of where you think it might go.
So, everybody's been talking about tech-enabled fitness and a lot of investment money kind of going into certain devices and people kind of saying, Bells of Steel, you guys are kind of old school, like iron and hard work and all that. And there's all these tech-enabled devices. I mean, first off, I don't think any of them have really created a sustainable business. They're burning shareholder cash to try and create a profitable business model. And I think there's room for tech enablement in training. However, like this full-blown, tech movement, I don't think it's going to stick around. I think that, iron and weights, it's been around for thousands of years and it's going to stick around.
I absolutely agree with you. I see a lot of weird fitness tech devices which are an absolute waste of money. I used to have a lot of clients come to me in Hollywood and say, what do you think of this thing? $1,500, $2,000, $3,000. And I would say, it does one thing poorly instead of a bunch of things infinitely.
Yeah.
And the idea, iron doesn't go away. Kettlebells have been created and recreated throughout history, all the way from the ancient Greeks, Chinese stone padlocks. In ancient Greece, it was halteres. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. And it just keeps coming back and back and back because there are some good ideas that definitely repeat. What do you think are some of the best old school devices that are being modified into a new idea?
All I can really think of is what's made the biggest breakthrough is just like the accessibility and pricing. So it wasn't too long ago that if you wanted a power rack, you had to go and get one welded up, or you wanted a kettlebell, you had to make one out of concrete or whatever. So just like the overall accessibility for price and supply chain has made such a giant improvement to the industry and for people to be able to get into fitness. I mean, man, even when I started training, when I was 19, 20, there was only a couple places in town that even had bumper plates.
When I was a kid training in Ohio, the only thing that we had were those iron bars that had screw locks on them with the sand-filled plates. That was it. A lot of the original stuff that I used to train with was concrete blocks, and taking concrete blocks and epoxying them together into weird shapes to do weird grip training stuff, or hanging from the rafters of barns. The idea of a dedicated pull-up rack blew my mind when I first saw it, that was a thing that people actually did. With that new piece of equipment, the squat rack came out, and it came out high enough that you could actually do muscle ups, and suddenly muscle ups explode in the world of fitness. And you're like, that's a really good idea, but it's really hard to train without that one piece of equipment. I think that fitness is going to keep going up and becoming more accessible as these ideas happen. What happens after muscle ups? Because for 100 years it was do pull-ups, do push-ups, do sit-ups. And then the squat rack came along and it became high enough that it suddenly became do muscle ups. And do toes to bar and all these other things that were really hard to do outside of a circus training environment. What are some of the weirdest tech things you've seen? I've seen some crazy ones.
I think I've seen a couple of really well done apps that try and emulate what you should be doing in your progression. And it looks so good on paper, and then I use it for a few weeks and it can't figure it out. I feel like everybody's trying to make working out an easy thing, and it's not. It's hard. And it has to be hard, and there's kind of no way around it.
That's one of the things that I always used to get asked by clients. They would say, at what point does training get easy? And I would say, absolutely never. And they said, is it easy for you? And you say, no, it's terrible every day. It's hard every day, and it should be. And I think that now with the advent of more information and faster information sharing, importance of the basics is becoming much better understood. The importance of squat and swing and get-ups and overhead presses is becoming much more apparent to people than it ever was before. This is something I saw in the evolution of the circus industry. where before Instagram was around, people city by city did certain tricks, and each city kind of had its own style of aerial. And when Instagram came around, suddenly you could see people in Moscow and people in Vancouver and people in Montreal all doing tricks. So the entire state of the circus industry in 10 years skyrocketed because of that ability to share information.
Yeah.
But it had nothing to do with tech other than sharing a video.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that's happening now. Training still expands, but it's still really based on watching what a good idea is on the other side of the planet.
Yeah, you really hit it there. Like, I didn't have the internet until my 20s. And like, I had been reading muscle mags, and I never wanted to be a bodybuilder. I wanted to get strong and big and whatever, but all the information I had access to was just these bodybuilding mags. So when I finally got on the internet and I was, getting into these different places and being like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. There's all these guys pioneering these things, or even things coming, like you said, from overseas. Like, the Russians originally developed the conjugate training method and then got adapted here, and then they exported the kettlebells, and that sharing of information and seeing what training is actually all about, instead of like 5 ways to get your biceps peaked in 5 workouts, like all that nonsense from back then. And other than, as I mentioned, like the training apps, which I do like just because of the engagement on them, I don't think this type of stuff's going in.
Yeah, I think the kettlebells are the best possible thing. Kettlebells and clubs and maces are the best thing to create the most amount of athleticism for the least amount of time, for the least amount of equipment. But then after that, you get into your classics, you get into your squats, your deadlifts, your overhead presses. And then after that, I like to deviate people towards that highly complex climbing skill. But that's just me. I love highly complex climbing skill. But I pull that directly from circus. But 10 years ago, that information was not available to people outside of a very specific subset of the population. But seeing like different types of ground engagement come out, animal flow, all these quadruped movement stuff that come and like originate from parkour. But tech devices, I think, are trying to make fitness easy, but you can't make it easier than it has to be. At some point, you still have to pick up a chunk of iron and not put it down for a specific amount of time in order to get the result you want.
Yeah, just doing hard things.
It is difficult. This has been Mark Wildman with
Kaevon from Bells of Steel.
And we'll come back with more videos talking about nerd stuff.